who's principal of the Jefferson County Schools in Colorado. Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, Rick. How are you?
Good morning. How are you, Dorian?
Rick, we know the Jefferson County Schools from the recent incident in April where Columbine. Are you in the Columbine School District?
I'm not in the Columbine area. The school district is one large school district just west of Denver, and Columbine is south of us, and I'm more in the central part of the district, in the Lakewood area. And Columbine is down south of us in Littleton.
In the Littleton area?
Yeah, but we're all in the same school district.
Now, I want to talk to you on a diverse set of subjects here, and we'll go from one extreme to the other. Right at the moment, you are principal of Creighton Middle School, is that correct?
Yeah, Creighton Middle School, uh-huh.
And, you used to be, weren't you principal of the open school?
I was principal of the open school, and then most recently, last year, I was an area administrator. In other words, I had an articulation area in Bear Creek, and Bear Creek is between Lakewood and Columbine. And then I also was in charge of all of the choice and option schools and charter schools here in Jefferson County.
Oh my goodness, you've done a lot of things. So you're very knowledgeable.
Somewhat.
All right.
Around the block.
So I'm going to take us through a lot of different areas here.
Sure.
One of which is talk to us about the aftermath and what is happening in the Jefferson County schools after the Columbine incident.
That was probably one of the most dramatic and traumatic events that I've certainly been a part of. Being a part of the central administration was very difficult because we weren't a part of schools. We were in charge of articulation areas, which is all the feeder schools to a high school. The district did a really pretty phenomenal job of immediate reaction and immediate response to the situation. And the long-term effects are still falling out, I believe. Columbine has had its own special attention paid to it. There's been a huge amount of resources put into that part of the county where counseling is available and all kinds of additional resources. The rest of the district is also affected, and right now, for instance, we have two separate committees, one working with just Columbine and the other working with a district-wide, what are we going to do on the anniversary of Columbine on April 20th of this year. The school district has implemented a very complete emergency plan based on many different conferences nationally, and came back and put together probably one of the most definitive documents we've ever received in the schools, I can tell you, about what to do for almost every possible contingency of emergency in the schools, and we're all practicing them throughout the district. There's kind of a misconception that the further away you are from Columbine, the less effect it has, but just personally, we've had two different situations here at Creighton this year. One was that we had a neighborhood shootout between the police and some kind of criminal, and they had to lock us down because these folks were out in the neighborhood. And that caused all kinds of trauma with our staff as well as our students. And then about 4 weeks later, we had a power outage. And again, our staff and students were really traumatized. And so we began contacting a group of people called the Columbine Connection, which is one of those agencies that was set up to give Columbine and Jefferson County schools assistance. And we asked one of those people to come in and talk to our staff about trying to understand what's happened to us since April 20th. And they are wonderful. They've brought in all kinds of research from other school districts that have had the same sort of thing happen, and how long it takes for kids to recover, what's going on with our brain and the brain chemistry, for instance, around trauma, and why certain kids seem to be okay and others not. And of course, all of us went through it. And so teachers are really struggling. We've seen incidences of increased failure, academic failure, and we've seen increased discipline problems throughout the district. Less as you get away from Columbine, but Columbine itself has had just they're just on pins and needles almost all the time. And then that issue that came out in Time and all of that didn't help. It just resurfaced all of those anxieties, and they.
You mean the picture on the front page?
Yep.
With the tapes?
That whole Time magazine article really threw people into a tailspin here again. I mean, and it just feels like no matter what we do, the media is going to keep it in front of us, and that's one of the things, in fact, that the Columbine Connection talks about is if at all possible, try not to read anything. But I can tell you, it's since Columbine, our newspapers have had something about Columbine nearly every day on the news or in the news. So it's been very difficult for people to get away from it and try to resume any kind of normal control of their lives. So it's been pretty difficult.
Now, this Columbine Connection, what is that?
It's a nonprofit organization that was formed to support the community of Columbine, and they bring counseling services to individuals, to families, free for all of those folks that need help, and they are set up in a private building. They're not set up in any kind of the schools, but they're available for everyone. And actually, they're there for the whole district, and that's something that when our staff heard that, I think that they were really kind of relieved. Place to go. And when I presented it to my PTSA, they were talking about how their own children are reacting, and they would like some help. And this is a nice place, other than the school and school counselors and those kinds of folks that are able to help students and families. We've also had an effort here in the district of getting our health professionals together on a regular basic cohort groups throughout the year, and they've had a chance to sit down and talk about what they need for their own mental health, but also how to help other folks. And that's been an ongoing situation since school started. How
long do they predict that the shock effect will, how long will it take for the shock to wear off?
What they're saying, research says that students go for, on average, about 18 months before they're able to begin resuming normal kinds of learning and that sort of thing. So we're a year away right now from having students kind of getting back to normal.
Well, I can understand all this. I mean, I really can't understand it. I don't want to mean to say that I have ever been in any kind of situation, but I know that shock can play. Of course, I've been a therapist for a very long time, but having it happen in your own life is a very difference. That my mother was killed in a car accident on Christmas Eve, so I can understand the shock of it. It's just taken me a year now to get back into a routine of exercise alone.
Yep, there you go.
And so, I mean, I can't even imagine what it was like, or the trauma of, I know about getting in the car and how it upsets me, and I look every way, and every time I drive down the road where she was killed, I think about it, and I can't even imagine what it's like being in this. Are they in the school building now?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've been back. The school was reopened in the spring.
In the fall. And in the library, too?
No, the library has been blocked off. And, in fact, the Board of Education just this week passed a resolution that they would build a new library, that they would actually remove or change what the library looks like now and put a library in a totally different place. There's a community committee of survivors of Columbine, mostly, called HOPE, and they are out to raise the $3.5 million for the project. And it just touches your heart all the time.
Now, what do you mean, the survivors? These are students?
Parents and students, yeah, of that survived Columbine or had children injured or wounded or died, and they're all members of this committee, and they petitioned the school board to not reopen the library at all ever. And so that means building a new library, and they're going to do the fundraising to do that. So it's a tremendously ambitious thing, but knowing these families, I have no problem believing that they'll do that.
Now, this brought to light so much. I mean, it was in the media. It's constantly in the media, and I'm sure come April 21st, it will be in the media all over again. What kinds of things are happening to students? You talked about the brain chemistry. What have you learned about the brain chemistry? I don't quite understand that.
I'm not sure I can explain it as well as the folks that talk to us about it, but basically what happens in a trauma or trauma event is that the brain is bathed in chemicals that accelerate and in sometimes dampen the brain chemistry, the reactions in the brain. Adrenaline is a big one, and so the brain gets bathed in this adrenaline for longer than a normal trauma. And what happens is every time, like what happened with the Time magazine, is that it's very quick then to come back. One of our teachers here is a coach with the Columbine swim team, and they were using a starter pistol to start the swim meet, start every event. And the girls on his team came over and asked him, please, let's use something else, because it kept taking them back to Columbine. And that's what she talks about, is that what happens then is that students are in a heightened awareness. They jump at every sound. They're always looking around them, and obviously they're not concentrating on learning.
I don't know how any learning can take place at Columbine.
I don't either. And in some cases it explains almost anywhere else that has had the trauma. And what most people I think know kind of intuitively was that it affected so many people. I mean, we have a Columbine parent on our staff. One of the area administrators last year had a daughter there that was going to be graduating, and I mean, everyone you talk to had a link. I have several friends that are teachers there and counselors that I'd worked with in other schools as we kind of grew up together. So all of us have had links to Columbine, and it's just been. There's a bumper sticker out that says, "We are all Columbine," and in some ways that's really true. And as I listened to Marguerite, who is the lady that came from Columbine Connections, I began believing even more that we're connected in ways we didn't even know about. The trouble with teenagers is that they don't talk about this. It's not something that's on the surface, and that's why what the Columbine Connection does so well is that they're able to help students that are in need of that. And she has a wonderful handout, and I can fax it over to you, of what parents can do, what teachers can do. And she was especially concerned about teachers, because teachers are so responsible that and what we've seen here is it's kind of like we're already in May. Our teachers have used all of the little tricks to get kids to work and learn and do, and they're exhausted because the kids are just not performing. They're just sitting, and that's what we know is one of the. It is, and then you want to kind of start blaming kids, but it's not them. It's what's been happening, and of course, our brains have been affected too. And what teachers have done is they've kind of put it away, and are gaining control of their lives by getting back to knowing what they do well, and that's to teach. And they've kind of eliminated or not brought out that issue. And she talks about you have to get the feelings into the frontal lobes of your brain so that you can process them, and you have to process and process and process before you can deal with it. And it's much like the grieving process. And you alluded
what is
to that.
The grieving?
I know when my mom died, anniversaries of it and everything, bring it all back, and you have to keep working on a spiral that works your way up instead of down.
You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. on 750 a.m. WAAT on your radio dial. We are here today with Rick Lopez, who is from the Jefferson County Public Schools in Colorado, as you know, from Columbine. And he's principal of Crichton Middle School. He was also with the Open School, which is about 9 miles away from Columbine. And he was administrator in the Jefferson County Public Schools last year. And we're talking about the aftermath of Columbine. And Rick, I was thinking that, we're going to do kind of the depressing first half hour, and I want to focus on the alternative school, the Open School the second half hour. But you made me realize that in our conversation here, we don't even think about or integrate into our learning process the fact that a majority of our children are dealing with trauma all the time, from divorce to, a parent being shot, or violence in the house, or abused children, or all of these things create this cloudiness in a child's mind where they can't learn, and we don't even take this into account in the learning process. It's only the Columbine incident that's really brought this to the fore.
True, very true. One of the graduation ceremonies of one of the other schools, we have 18 high schools in this district, so one of the other schools was talking about, and it was, one of the speakers was saying, not to be disrespectful of Columbine, but we've lost many of our own students during the year to all kinds of reasons, and our students have been shot in the streets, but we never received this attention, and it was only Columbine that seems to get it, and yet it's happening in our buildings as well, not in the buildings so much, but in their neighborhoods. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, we lost a tremendous number of students, but I think that same number of students are being lost, weekly, yearly, however you want to measure that, in many other schools, and those students are dealing with it or not dealing with it. And it just was more serious for us because it was inside a school, and I think that's when it really does get your attention, because you've got classrooms running as we speak. We have classrooms running, and we have to know, and they have to know that they're safe. And that's something that we've really worked hard on. All of the schools in Jefferson County have much different ways of doing business. I mean, parents have to sign in now when they walk in. It was a very much more relaxed atmosphere, and it was just kind of a coming of age, if you will, of we need to be doing business quite a bit differently.
Well, also, much of the center city education is based around a lot of violence. I mean, students see or participate in violent acts all the time, and yet it took, Columbine, a middle-class, white, basically, school district, to bring this to our attention, and yet we really haven't addressed those issues in public schools in inner cities. We don't really know what to do with them. And
it's difficult to address. It is a pervasive kind of thing, and it's difficult, I think, for teachers to be convinced that they need to spend time with that emotional level when they're being asked to do so many more academic things in today's society as well.
I don't know how the Jefferson County School Board could possibly ask their teachers and their students to perform this year and or next year, in any comparable way to anything. I mean, if I were on that school board, I'd throw out everything and just try to do where people are.
And interesting you would say that, because we just did pass a mill levy this year that has a performance promise in it, that if we don't perform at a certain level, then we don't get any of the revenue. So it was
Oh, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, it has, I can tell you, has put a tremendous amount of stress on just about everybody that's responsible for schools and for learning, because it was a first time that we've passed a mill levy in many, many, many years here, but it has this double-edged sword to it, and
haven't the legislators looked at the things that are happening in Jefferson County schools with regard to this? I mean, don't they even think about the kinds of ramifications this has on the students? I mean, they're overstressed with the shock event, and having to be overstressed as well as the staff.
Right. And the committee that I'm on, I'm actually on that district-wide committee of what are we going to do on the anniversary, and I was listening to the mental health person talk about they had petitioned the state for funds to not only deal with Columbine and Jefferson County in the metro Denver area, but the entire state, and the governor's office turned them down, saying, no, you don't need that, everybody's fine. And it is kind of unbelievable in some ways that we're not.
Well, people think because the incident is over, it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
And they just have no idea that, anybody who has experienced shock in their lives knows that it takes a great deal of time to overcome this.
That's
and
right.
You're dealing with it on a very, very large scale here. What are there, 2,000 students at Columbine?
Yes.
So
there's 89,000 students in the entire district.
89,000 students?
We're the largest district in Colorado as far as population.
Oh, my goodness gracious. So, you're talking about a lot of children here who have been affected in one way or another. How can you...
And another 11,000 employees.
And it's just so, this is a perfect example, though, Rick, of what we have been talking about on this program with respect to how legislators create legislation and policies aren't on the day-to-day operational levels with the school district and cannot possibly understand the ramifications of some of the things that they do.
Well, you have no argument for me on that. I totally agree with you.
And part of our job and part of the job that we try to do here is we give our tapes to legislators to give them information about why things happen and how they happen, so they get an understanding that, these aren't just isolated incidences, these occur. Now, I wanted to ask you something. You said you had a resource book for the aftermath of Columbine that is now, a step-by-step process of things that would happen?
It's an emergency management book for each school. And it's really well done. It talks about every contingency, uses the most current thinking about how to organize yourself in the school to address an emergency.
Do you offer that to, can I get a copy of that?
I can probably get you one from our central district, yeah.
Okay. I'd like to share that with other people, just to, of course we'll give you all the credit and everything, but I just like to let people know that this is available in our listening audience and around the nation and places that I go to.
Okay. Yeah,
if that's okay with you, because I know that the state of Pennsylvania here, where our radio program broadcasts, has developed an emergency team response right after Columbine. So the president of the Principals Association has leadership in that role, and I'd like to let other people be aware of what you have accomplished here.
Yeah, I think this would be very useful for them.
Let's go to something that you wrote to me about here. Oh, and again, you are at the middle school, the Crichton Middle School, and that's the area. Middle school is the area where students tend to not know, be in confusion anyway with their bodies growing so quickly, etc. How are the middle schools students dealing with this trauma? Is it any different?
What we're seeing is. It's hard for me to say because I wasn't at this school at the last year or before Columbine. The only thing that our staff has talked about is that there are more students not being successful as students, and I'm talking about failing classes, and much more apathy than normal for middle school kids who have that quality anyway. And in fact, the Columbine Connection person was saying, all of these qualities are part, as she was talking about the ramifications or manifestations of the trauma. She said middle school kids have these normally. So it's really difficult with middle school level kids to find out if, in fact, it's Columbine that's causing the issue. But I can tell you after our two little incidences this year, we know that they're on edge. And parents are telling us that when kids get together, they talk to each other about what would happen to them if they were in a Columbine and how they would treat their own friends. And, it's really, it's sad because it's stuff that you would hope kids wouldn't have to be talking about at this age level.
Now, you just reminded me of something. When my mom was killed in the car accident, all of her grandchildren dropped out of school.
Oh.
They were all in college, and they all dropped out for their semester after her death. So nobody could think. Everybody had difficulty in their classrooms and everything. And I just remembered that. It's funny, I didn't even think about it. So it does have a pervasive effect on the ability to learn, and I wish people would understand this, not only at the level that we're talking about it here, but as teachers who are listening to this broadcast and as parents who are involved in divorces or, traumatic experiences, someone who dies in a fatal car accident or whatever, it does affect your children.
Absolutely.
All of these incidences.
If you've ever been in a school where there was an automobile accident where a student was killed, you've seen that in what was microcosm for what happened at Columbine.
Actually, when I was in college, my first 3 years of college, we had 18 people killed in car accidents.
Yep, there you go.
So I'm very well aware of what you're talking about. This is almost the end of our first half hour here, and is there anything you'd like to, I kind of want to get off this gloom and doom subject, although I really feel the lessons here are lessons for all of us, not just Columbine, but all of my listening audience. I really believe really needs to take heed with this, especially the fact that this does have an effect on the brain, that this post-traumatic stress syndrome does have an effect on the brain chemistry, and it does affect a child's learning long after the incident, up to 2 years after the incident takes place. Is there anything you'd like to summarize or tell our audience? And I'm going to kind of get off this subject in our second half hour. So is there anything you'd like to summarize?
No, not really. I think that what I've recognized is the human spirit will overcome, and I marvel. I applaud all of our staff for sometimes for walking in the door and just taking this on. And my concern always is the helpers, the teachers, and watching out for their health, because they're so wrapped up in trying to do the right thing that oftentimes they get so exhausted. And we've seen evidence of that too. They just are burning out at a quicker rate. So that would be my only recommendation: is don't look just at kids, but look at the helpers as well, and try to maintain health for yourself so that you can make it through. And I remember when Columbine first occurred that the folks that came in from the national organizations kept telling us that we're in a marathon, not a sprint. And that's a really important thing to remember. It does take a while.
I just wanted to tell our audience that I received a fax from, I don't know where I get faxes from, everywhere, email, but I received one from the Education Reporter, the newspaper of education rights, December 1999, and it is a news bulletin about that the Colorado School Board had passed a resolution warning about Ritalin in the school district, and that there were many people who had warning about the possible negative effects of psychotropic, which are mind-altering prescription drugs on school children, and that effect. Many of the people who spoke talked about the fact that the shooters in this incident were on psychotropic drugs. Can you don't have much information on this at the moment, do you?
No, no, I don't. Not really. Only in the sense that what we have done here at this school is to notify all of our students that we know who are on that kind of a prescription, to encourage parents to very regularly have the blood levels checked. With teenagers, their bodies are changing so much that the effect may not be what it was originally when it worked. And we've seen the positive effects here of that in abilities for students to concentrate and to be able to learn rather than literally bouncing off the walls. But our biggest concern after the legislature, or not legislature, but the Board of Education, was to make sure our parents were monitoring it, and not just. And we're very careful not to ask that they be medicated, but to use that as simply an option, that this is something they may want to investigate.
Well, that's what the much of this paper describes, how parents have been forced and coerced by teachers to have their children put on these mind-altering drugs in order to return back to the classroom, which is what they were concerned about. And I personally have, as I think you know, done a study on shooters since 1997, and all of them, the shooters in school incidences, all of them have been on psychotropic drugs. So there is a correlation here, and in fact, if you read the medical journals which describe the effects of these drugs, violent behavior is one of the side effects. So we'll be looking closely at whatever is happening in Colorado for us to, and I don't know how much of the population of children, in fact, is ADD. I mean, there's so much controversy over this right now. I have the resolution here, promoting the use of academic solutions to resolve problems with behavior, attention, and learning instead of drugs. Whereas the Colorado School Board of Education is constitutionally charged with the general provision of education, the responsibility of school personnel is to ensure student achievement. Our medical personnel can recommend prescriptions, not teaching personnel, and it goes on and on about diagnosing and medication of students, and gives a very severe warning about these psychotropic drugs on student achievement and their ability to provide a safe and civil learning environment for the rest of the students. So there is concern here, and I'm glad to see that we're taking a look at this.
Right. And I agree with you. We've never taken the stance that a student can't be in school unless they receive medication. We've always offered many choices to parents and let them decide what's best for them and their families. And I think that the Board of Education for the state just reinforced that need to be very careful with that.
You're listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here today with Rick Lopez from the Jefferson.
And it was an attempt by parents to create a totally different way of educating students than what they were receiving from conventional schooling. So they petitioned the Board of Education for that, and originally it started under a lot of the Piaget ideas, and it began as an elementary program, and the school grew as kids got older. So there are really 3 different schools, an elementary, a middle, and a high school within the program. Basically, kind of a short story of it is that what the school attempts to do is to provide successful functional adults to today's world. And so the graduation requirements are to acquire the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors appropriate to adulthood, and then to test those skills in 6 what we call passages, which comes from rite of passage or step into adulthood, in their real world, and to apply those skills and to test whether or not they're ready to take the next step and whether or not they're ready to be adults. It's an exciting school to be in. There are no grades, no credits, so we're not talking about students working to just a certain level, but to really learning about what they are. There's a functioning advising program, so every student is attached to an adult, and as the kids get older, they get more choice about who it is that they work with. It's a very individualized program. All the students have individual educational learning plans, and they are able to then make school work for them rather than the school working on them. There's a lot of traveling done by the school. A lot of learning happens outside of the classroom, and we try to mirror life as much as possible with that sort of thing. What else do you need to know? The district, fortunately, right now transports our students to the program, so they come from all over the school district. It is a school of choice. Parents and students choose to be in our program. It's not a referred setup where a student is having trouble in school and comes to the school. What we've learned about all of that is that it has a reputation sometimes of being the dropout prevention program, but it really isn't. It's a program where parents are interested in students learning in a very different way. As students get to be older in the program, they actually have more and more to say about how the program is run. We've had students as young as 3rd grade on interview hiring committees for teachers, and in the high school we can't hire students without kids being on the committee, and their vote counts the same as anyone else. It's a lot of consensus decision making. The students in the high school and middle school have a governance that really sets the rules and regulations for the students. As principal there, I would never even think of creating a rule without sitting down with just about everybody in the world. So it's shared decision-making at its best, or worse if you're impatient, because it takes a long time for that to happen. My son is currently there, has been there since 3rd grade, and he's what would be considered a junior. We don't really have classes. We don't look at kids as freshmen, sophomores, and juniors because it's so self-paced, and students can take 3 years to finish the program in high school or 5 if they need it. Based on the fact that they're working and still accomplishing things, not just hanging out, as we call it, or just sitting around. Many students are teachers in the program. They will go out and do some things in the world and then come back and be one of the things that they're doing is giving back to the school. And we have a very strong community learning, community service aspect to almost everything. When students go, there's a trip going down to the Dominican Republic next week, and they'll be diving on the reefs and helping save the reefs, but they're also going to do a Habitat for Humanity house while they're there and work, and that's just typical of what the kids do when they travel. And these are trips where the students make their own money to go. The parents are not paying their way because the kids literally have to buy in, so there's tons of fundraising going on all the time. And we always go cheap. We often drive to wherever we're going, and we camp out or camp in. So this is not a huge vacation type of a trip. It's not like the typical field trip or exotic kinds of things. We have a really good program in Mazatlan, Mexico, just south of there, in a place called Teacapan. And the students live in the homes of Mexican folks for 2 weeks, and they're totally immersed in the language. And I have actually witnessed our Lakewood High School or Lakewood students becoming bilingual. And that's really difficult in a conventional setting, but they know when they come back from that trip just exactly what they need, and they go out and get it. So it's exciting. I could talk for hours, sorry.
No, you've answered. I wrote down all these questions to ask you, and you answered them all before I even got to ask them.
Yeah.
Now, let's take a few steps back because you have given people a tremendous amount of information. So there's no grades and there's no credits, but you said you assess students to make sure that they are in alignment with your principal philosophies. Now, tell us how you assess them if you don't give them tests.
Okay. Well, there are tests. Students can acquire the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors literally any way they and their advisor and parents agree. So the schedule looks differently for each student. The staff does teach classes. They look like college seminars. In fact, the daily or weekly schedule looks like a college schedule in the secondary level. And so they can go to school literally anywhere they want. They can go to school in our school to get what they need. They can go to school in conventional schools. We have an agreement with conventional high schools and middle schools that if they have something that we don't, and if there's space available, our students can plug in. And then literally they can go all over the world to do their learning. And we've had students do their passages by traveling to foreign countries or to different states to do their learning. We had one girl that went to the National Dolphin Institute in Mobile, Alabama, one summer and spent the whole summer studying dolphins and came back with the goal of becoming a marine biologist, and sure enough, she is one right now. They can take trips with us, and as I said, the trips are always learning on the road, and sometimes they're very local. They're right here in the state of Colorado, and they just do a college tours trip for young high school students to begin seeing where they could go here in Colorado. They can do the community learning, community service activities where they can go out and apprentice themselves to careers and that sort of thing. And so what happens is after every event that happens for the student, they literally tell us what they've learned. And it's a really interesting way of doing that because we have them write an evaluation. It's a narrative explaining what they learned specifically. And if the student has taken an algebra class, they can't talk about, they can't say, well, I just took algebra. They have to specifically say what it is that they have learned about algebra. And then the teacher of that class reads that evaluation and signs off on it. And that stops the student from non-attendance or from doing what many students do is, at the very end of a quarter or a semester or grading period, putting on a little burst of speed to pass the class. And the teacher can say, wait a minute, you were here, you were physically here, but you didn't do anything, and so this is not transcriptable. And all of the evaluations then are signed off by certified or qualified staff that say, yes, we agree that this has been done. And our students write transcripts. They narratively write transcripts at the beginning and at middle and end of each year of their high school career, because we used to just have them write the final transcript, and it was just horrendous. So now they've got practice before they get there, and that end of their time in our high school transcript is a narrative document that tells whoever wants to read it how this person became an adult and what they did to do that. And they're very powerful documents because they really do tell of the struggles oftentimes and the triumphs of students learning to become adults long before they are. And colleges love our students because they're so self-directed. And so those evaluations are the documentation of their working toward their skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, and that's how they plug it into to their individual educational plan. That's reviewed regularly by the advisor with the student, and they say, okay, what's your progress here? What is it you still need to do? Where are you going to go get that done?
Well, I just want you to know something. There must be something to self-directed learning because, as you know, I'm here in the studio by myself working with these dials. And the first half hour we talked about the Columbine incident, and I can tell you that I had to keep turning up the dial on your voice monitor. And now that you've started to talk about this school, you keep going off the chart the other way.
Sorry, yeah.
So
get pretty excited about the open school.
You obviously are very excited about it. Now, my question is, and I'm going to continue to talk about the school, but I have a burning question right now, which is that I know that you've said in the first half hour that there are 85,000 schools in the Jefferson County School District. And you have a school that obviously has been successful over the last 30 years. I want to know why half of the Jefferson County School District hasn't adopted this strategy.
We used to ask ourselves that question a lot. With 89,000 students, why aren't there more options? And I think I don't know what the thinking was. I think we were really a threat to the conventional schools in the beginning. They didn't understand what we were doing, and we weren't as vocal as I think we have become about what we were about. We were learning, and the school is constantly evolving. It's a work in progress. It's not perfect, and so it's real difficult to explain because even what I'm telling you is probably already different because I've been gone for 3 years from the school. But the core of it is important, and that is the advising program. I mean, that is the heart. And most middle schools have an advisement program, but our staffing process in the district, due to all kinds of contractual agreements, it makes it difficult to get students and staff and parents in a school that are there by choice. And what we recognized was that the choice was really the powerful element in all of this, that kids would do probably more work and much more difficult work at the open school than they would in a conventional school, but they do it willingly and happily because they chose to be here or there. And so schools of choice really, I think, is the issue, and Jefferson County has a number of choices. I think for as large a district as we are, we could probably have more. And then I think the charter school movement came along and took that out of the hands of the school district. There is a clone of the open school as a charter in the district. And there are other schools that take care of learning needs as charters, not as district alternatives. And I think it was an opportunity missed by our district, to be really honest, and I think they're regretting it in some ways. And now, our situation is that we don't have a lot of buildings to put these kind of programs in. And
well, why not schools within schools?
Schools within schools work. They're difficult, I can tell you. I'm a GT Center program, Gifted and Talented Center program, so we attract students from all over the district, and it's hard. It's hard to have a school that's really different within a conventional school because the morale of teachers and how they look at each other and the acceptance level is something that principals have to massage all the time, but it can be done, and they can be very, very successful. And historically, they've been pretty difficult to pull off. But I think if all else fails, then why not? Go ahead and try. The thing that has mitigated this whole issue of choice and doing something really different has been our state tests. We call them the CSATs, the Colorado State Assessment Program, and modeled after Texas and all the other states that have adopted state testing. And that, again, a legislature really driving curriculum and driving what has to happen in schools is a real problem for alternatives who are already dealing with kids who are not the conventional learners. And taking tests like that are really not, if you're a student that learns best by going out and experiencing things, to sit still for 6 hours and take a test isn't appealing at all, and so typically the standardized tests are not where our students do really well.
Well, of course not. You don't address that.
And we don't care.
No.
In a sense, and we tell our parents that we're not interested in ITBS scores. We don't look at those scores as your student's entry into the school. It's just simply you're wanting to be here and buying into the fact that what's really important is their adulthood, and and addressing what they need to know. And for my wife and I, as I look at my son and his learning, we know that if he doesn't get it all in high school, that what we're confident about is that he's become a learner, and that if he needs to get something, he will.
Yep, that's the key.
And that learning, and what that sets him up to be is also a lifelong learner, which I like a lot. And so I'm not worried about his getting it all and getting it all crammed into 6 hours a day and doing all of the homework and all of that. I'm more interested in watching his self-discipline around some other things, as well as his learning. And to be really honest, he struggles with that. I mean, he struggles with his learning, and I think this is the perfect school for him to be in. And it's small, so they know each other. It's a very safe school. They have a totally nonviolent norm, and that's something that the students have insisted on years and years before Columbine ever happened. So it's a very safe place, and the kids react that way. When they're safe and they're kind of nurtured and taken care of, they can blossom, and they're not fearful of anyone or anything. I love the school. When you walk down the halls and talk to students, all of the kids look you right in the eye. And they're very glib. They've learned that adults are there to help them, not someone that's going to punish them or look down on them or criticize them necessarily. And not that doesn't happen, but we always do it in private. We never do it out in the hallways. So it's a very, people have called it a very comfortable school to actually visit and to be in.
It's amazing that 9 miles away, Columbine hasn't looked at you. You know, I think one of the major problems that I see with alternative schools that are working is the fact that they spend all of their time with their students one-on-one and nurturing them, and don't have the opportunity to market who they are.
Exactly.
And to let people know who they are, which is what I hope the function that we have.
Yeah. We would spend hours as a staff talking about how we could do that, and then we'd look around the room and say, well, who is going to do that? Who's going to pick that up? And nobody had time. Yeah,
exactly.
Or the energy, and we certainly weren't staffed to have a publicist in our midst, and so we, it is catch as catch can, and it's almost totally word of mouth that gets students involved, because parents will go back and talk in their neighborhoods, and kids will talk about how great a school it is, and that's kind of kept us alive for a long time.
You are listening to Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m., and we're here today with Rick Lopez from the Jefferson County Public Schools. And we're on the positive note side. We talked about Columbine the first half hour. In the second half hour, we're talking about the open school, which exists in the same school district. And something you didn't mention that I wanted you to talk about and address before our program is over is the walkabout.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Tell us what the walkabout is in the open school.
Walkabout was adopted from Maurice Gibbons' book, or actually it was an article in Phi Delta Kappa in June or May of 1974. And I remember I was actually in administration school and read that article and went back to the school I was principal of at the time, or going to be principal of, and said, we've got to have this as a senior alternative. And what it is was his recognition that graduation from high school was really not a rite of passage, or it was the rite of passage for our students, but it wasn't doing what a rite of passage does. It didn't really recognize the students as adults. It only recognized that they'd suffered or survived 12 years, and then it was then that they were going to go out and start becoming adults. And so his idea was that they should do mini passages in high school to show that they were ready to start that trail earlier than waiting until they were graduating from college or whenever it was. And at the same time, I believe he did, or there were other folks that were quoting when adults felt like they were adults. And in the United States, it was like 24, 25 years old before people began really feeling like they were adult. And in other countries like Europe and other nations, they were doing that at 18, and so he was looking at life experiences. And the walkabout comes from the Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal walkabout. Student goes out and walks about for 6 months in the bush on his own, comes back, usually always successful, in meaning that he comes back alive, because he was trained. He had all the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors appropriate to that adulthood. And so this program was designed in the open school. Actually, when it opened as a high school, didn't adopt it for about the first 2 years, but then they realized they needed to have some kind of structure. They couldn't just dump it on the advisor and the kids to create what would be happening and how we would know. And so we took on the idea of 6 passages, and those are adventure, creativity, career exploration, global awareness, logical inquiry, and a practical skill. And all the students have to do those 6, but they can do them any way, again, that they and their advisor approve. And they're always designed as challenges. They can't be something that they already know how to do. They have to be something that extends what they know or is really challenging in the way that they don't know what to do. And it's risky in the sense that it's oftentimes at least a risk of failing, and sometimes a lot more. And in those passages, when kids are talking about climbing mountains or taking long backpack trips or driving across country or whatever, we get together with parents. There's a committee of folks that approve this walkabout or walk the passages, and it's the parents, the student, the advisor, another advisor that is called a passage consultant, a part of the advising group. We call them triads. And those kids and staff sit down with the student who has already spent hours and hours and hours writing a proposal, lots of writing in the school. So they explain why this is a step into adult for them, why this activity is appropriate, and then the nuts and bolts, how they're going to pull it off. For some kids, they propose a passage years before they actually go do it, because part of the passage is making the money to go do whatever they're going to do. And so they begin working on that. And at the end of it, they write this kind of monster evaluation that we call the passage wrap-up, and they come back and sit down with that same group of people, and they approve the passage. They say, yep, it sure enough, you did it, and congratulations, that's a step into adult for you. And the kid is able to, the student's able to say that. I know that this was a step into adulthood because here's what's happened. Here's how I know I'm on my way. Other kids will come back and say, that wasn't enough. I'd like to do this now. And the committee will say, okay, when you get through that, come back and we'll talk about that as a passage. Some kids will bite off more than they can chew. And they'll come back and we'll say, well, let's take a look at what you did learn out of this and see if there's elements of your adulthood in here that we can look at. So,
Rick, what kinds of examples of walkabouts are there? Like what? I mean,
they're amazing. It's one of the most exciting times because the student really literally is in charge of their entire curriculum at that time. I can talk about my own students. I had one student that who came to us as a straight A student out of middle school, and about 3 weeks into the school just broke down in my office and said to me, I don't think I know anything. And I said, what? You're a straight A student in middle school? And she said, yeah, but all I did was take tests, and I'd forget that information, get ready and take tests, and I took tests really well, but I don't think I remember anything. So that started her on a passage, practical skills, doing something for yourself that other people usually do for you. And I said, you've just got to learn how you learn. And so she took classes in colleges, and she took classes up at the local high school and took classes with us and went on trips and kept journals about how she was learning. And she was on a school trip. She was doing another passage on saving the wetlands. This was up when we were up in Evergreen, and there's a lake, and they were dredging the lake and dumping the sludge on the wetlands above the lake in the marsh. And she got involved with the Audubon Society and the bird habitats and actually gave testimony to the Corps of Army Engineers that was doing all this work, and in the same time took a school trip down to the Everglades, which is the largest wetlands in the world, or at least in the United States. And as they were driving through through the Everglades, she got on the CBs between the two vans and started explaining what they were looking at. She became the tour guide of the Everglades, and she'd never been there, but she had studied so well and understood it. And she said, that's when I knew that I could remember and that I knew. And so what she discovered was something that we probably could have told her, that she was an experiential learner, that she was, she had reading problems. She had to hold a bookmark under every line because her eyes would jump. And so she would have to, it was painful to watch her read. She never forgot it, but it was the application of it. It was learning it in so many different ways. And so she became a successful, she in fact graduated just a few years ago as an environmental engineer and is on her way. We had another student, like the one that went down to Mobile, Alabama, did many passages on that trip. She had never arranged a trip by herself. We should always gone on these school trips. And so found out she had a phone phobia in the process and had to talk long distance and had to arrange for all of these lodging and transportation, and of course had to get jobs. So that was one part of it. There was an adventure in it that we didn't know about, but she and her advisor did, that she was really afraid that she didn't know anything. She'd been an open school student all her life and had never had a grade to tell her that she was really okay. And she thought she was dumb. And here she was going down to work with college PhDs that were studying dolphins, and she was going to be a high school junior, and was absolutely panicked that she wasn't going to be able to survive it. And actually, when she got the word that she was going, went into one of the deepest panics she'd ever been in. And her advisor did what we always did: is, no, you're going to go. We're not going to let you get out of this. This is the challenge. Otherwise, you will never know if you're going to be okay as a learner. And sure enough, she went down there and every day was out on a boat observing. They were looking at seagulls coming to the water, and they didn't know if dolphins had fed and the seagulls were coming to feed on the leftovers, or if the birds were coming where the fish were, and the dolphins would follow the fish. And they were trying to identify that stuff. And she would go home every night, and they would write notes and discuss things with each other. And she came back knowing many things. She knew that she could travel on her own. She knew that she wanted to be a marine biologist. She did a career exploration on that, and she knew she could always learn. And those are just amazingly powerful things. When those kids come back, you can just see the difference, and it changes their lives.
This is an incredible, incredible school. If you'd like to find out more information, anything that Rick Lopez has been speaking about, can we give out your school phone number?
Well, in fact, what I'll do is I'll give you the open school number.
Okay.
The open school number is area code 303-982-7045. The current principal there is Bonnie Walters, Miss Bonnie Walters. And she can talk at length about the program as well, and hook up folks with students, and they're always available for visitations.
And if you'd like any questions about Rick Lopez, his number is 303-982-6282.
Yeah.
If you'd like any other information about any of our programs, or you'd like a tape of our program, please give us a call at toll-free 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS, or you can email us at PROKIDS, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. That's PROKIDS at rlc.net. And we're coming to the conclusion of our hour here. It's gone by so quickly, it's unimaginable. I just had so many questions, none of which got answered, but that's okay. Would you like to just sum up all of our conversation today, Rick?
Yeah. I'd like to start with the positive. I really believe that choice is a very, very powerful thing in all of our lives. But I think in education we sometimes forget how powerful it can be. And I believe that that issues around Columbine are best addressed in small settings. I think our schools are way too large. For all kinds of reasons. I know that that's an efficient way to do things, but I do believe that small is better, and I just keep going back to all our little charters and all our option schools that have put caps on their population because they know they can't do the job that they're doing if they're too big.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us and for our audience. We appreciate your coming with us every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and we have been visiting with Rick Lopez from the Jefferson County Public Schools. Thank you again, Rick, for joining us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated it.
And he's out in Colorado, obviously. If you'd like any information, you're free to call us at 877-PRO-KIDS. That's 877-PRO-KIDS. And join us again next week when we'll have interesting conversations about our children. Thank you and have a wonderful week. Good day.